I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Brenda Thornhill standing at the end of my driveway with her phone out, taking pictures of my property like she was documenting a crime scene. It was a Saturday morning in late April, and I'd been living in the Willowbrook Heights subdivision in Raleigh, North Carolina for exactly 3 years. 3 peaceful years, until Brenda had been elected HOA president 6 months ago. My name is Samuel Peterson, and I'm a mechanical engineer who works from home most days. I'd spent the previous weekend building a small storage shed in my backyard, nothing fancy, just an 8 by 10 foot structure to store my lawn equipment and tools. I'd checked the HOA guidelines before starting, made sure it met the size requirements, placed it in the appropriate setback zone, and even painted it to match my house. Everything by the book. But Brenda didn't care about books unless she was writing them herself. "That shed is an eyesore," she called out when she noticed me watching from my kitchen window. She didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed about being caught snooping. "I'm reporting this to the county inspector." I opened my front door and walked out onto the porch. "The shed is compliant with all HOA regulations, Brenda. I measured everything twice." "We'll see about that." She tapped something on her phone with aggressive little jabs. "I have connections at the county office. They'll be here Monday morning." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wasting everyone's time, but experience had taught me that arguing with Brenda was like trying to reason with a brick wall that filed complaints. So I just nodded and went back inside, already mentally preparing for whatever bureaucratic nightmare she was about to unleash. True to her word, Monday morning at 8:30 sharp, a white truck pulled up in front of my house. The door opened and out stepped a man in his mid-50s, wearing a county inspector's vest and carrying a clipboard. He had gray hair, a weathered face, and the expression of someone who'd seen it all and wasn't impressed by any of it. I met him at the door before he could knock. "You must be here about the shed." "Marcus Davidson, County Building Inspector." He shook my hand with a firm grip. "Got a complaint filed by a Brenda Thornhill. She seems to think you've got some kind of illegal structure back there." "It's a storage shed. 8 by 10, properly set back, matches the house paint, everything according to HOA specs." I gestured toward the side gate. "Want to take a look?" "That's what I'm here for." I led him around the house to the backyard. The shed sat in the far corner, about 15 feet from both property lines, its gray siding identical to my house's exterior. I'd even used the same architectural shingles on the roof. If anything, it improved the look of my yard by giving me a place to store things instead of leaving them scattered around. Marcus walked around the shed slowly, checking the measurements with a laser measurer, examining the construction, even opening the door to look inside. After about 10 minutes, he made some notes on his clipboard and turned to me. "This is one of the most properly built accessory structures I've seen in a residential setting," he said. "You do this yourself?" "Yeah, over 2 weekends. Used to help my dad with construction growing up. It shows, everything's level, properly anchored, good materials." He made a few more notes. "I'm going to need to see your HOA guidelines, just to make sure we're all on the same page." I pulled up the digital copy on my phone and showed him the relevant sections. He read through them carefully, comparing the requirements to what he'd measured. "You're in full compliance," he finally said. "More than full compliance, actually. The HOA allows structures up to 12 by 12 without special approval. Yours is well under that. So no fine, no violation? Not even close. I'll file a report saying everything's in order." He paused, then added, "This Brenda Thornhill, she lived nearby." 2 houses down. I pointed in the direction of her house. "She's the HOA president, not a fan of mine, apparently." Marcus's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been amusement flickering across his face. "Thornhill. That name sounds familiar." He pulled out his phone and typed something in. His eyebrows went up. "Oh yeah, we've had a few complaints about properties in this subdivision, most of them filed by Mrs. Thornhill. She likes to keep busy. Seems that way." He glanced down the street toward Brenda's house. "You know what? Since I'm already out here and on the clock, I think I'll do a quick survey of the neighborhood. Part of my job is to check on potential code violations when I'm in an area anyway." I had a feeling I knew where this was going, but I kept my expression neutral. "That so?" "Yep. Citizens file complaints, but we're also supposed to be proactive." He gave me a knowing look. "I'll be in touch if I need anything else about your shed." but I doubt I will. You did good work, Mr. Peterson. I watched him walk back to his truck, then drive slowly down the street. He stopped in front of Brenda's house, got out, and started walking around with his clipboard. A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Maybe karma did exist after all. I went back inside and tried to focus on work, but I couldn't help glancing out the window every few minutes. Marcus spent about 45 minutes at Brenda's property, taking pictures, making notes, measuring things. At one point, he knocked on her door. I couldn't hear the conversation, but Brenda's body language went from confident to defensive real quick. Around lunchtime, my phone rang. It was my neighbor, Tom Grayson, who lived directly across from Brenda. "Dude, are you seeing this?" Tom sounded gleeful. "The inspector is still at Brenda's house and she looks pissed." "I saw him earlier. He came to check my shed, said it was fine." "Let me guess, Brenda called him?" "Bingo!" Tom laughed. "Oh man, this is perfect. She's been on everyone's case for months. Last week she sent me a letter saying my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Black, like there are different important shades of black. What's the inspector doing now? Looks like he's leaving. Wait, he's stopping at her mailbox. He's taking pictures of it. Oh, this is gold." I heard Tom's wife, Jennifer, saying something in the background. Then Tom came back on. "Jen says I shouldn't enjoy this so much, but come on. Brenda deserves whatever she gets." After we hung up, I tried to actually get some work done. I had a project deadline approaching and couldn't spend all day watching neighborhood drama. But around 3 in the afternoon, there was a knock at my door. It was Marcus again. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, come on in." He stepped inside, and I noticed he had a manila envelope tucked under his arm. "So, I finished my inspection of the Thornhill property. Find anything interesting?" His expression remained professional, but I caught a glint in his eye. "Found quite a bit, actually. 11 code violations, to be exact." I almost choked on the water I'd just sipped. 11? 11. He pulled out some photos from the envelope. "Want to see?" We sat down at my kitchen table and he spread out the pictures. Each one showed a different violation at Brenda's house, and Marcus explained them one by one. "First, she's got a shed too, bigger than yours. 12 by 14, which puts it over the HOA limit. She'd need special board approval for that size, and according to the records I checked, she never got it." He pointed to another photo. "Second, the shed isn't properly set back from the property line. It's supposed to be 15 feet minimum. Hers is at 11 feet. "That's rich," I muttered. "Gets better. Third violation, her fence is 6.5 feet tall. Code limits residential fences to 6 feet without a variance." He shuffled to another photo. "Fourth, she's got a satellite dish mounted on the front of her house. That's specifically prohibited in your HOA bylaws. Those have to be in the back or side of the property, out of street view." I leaned forward, fascinated. "What else?" "Fifth, she's running a business out of her home. Nothing wrong with that in general, but she's got clients coming and going, and residential zones require a home occupation permit for businesses that have regular client visits. She doesn't have one." He showed me a photo of a sign in her front window. "Says she's a certified life coach, offers in-home consultations." "I've seen people coming and going," I admitted. Didn't think much of it. Sixth violation, her driveway's been expanded beyond the approved footprint. She added about 4 feet on one side, poured new concrete, never got a permit. Another photo. Seventh, she's got an unpermitted deck addition on the back of her house. Looks like it was added within the last year or so, no permit on file. Marcus continued through the list. The 8th violation was an improperly installed air conditioning unit that didn't meet setback requirements. The 9th was a decorative fountain in her front yard that violated HOA guidelines about water features. The 10th was exterior lighting that didn't meet the dark sky ordinance the county had adopted 2 years ago, too bright and pointed in the wrong direction. "And the 11th?" I asked. "Her mailbox." Marcus actually smiled at this one. "It's not up to Postal Service standards. The post is rotted at the base, structurally unsound. That's actually a county code violation for safety reasons. A strong wind could knock it over into the street." I sat back in my chair, processing all of this. So what happens now? I'm issuing citations for all 11 violations. She'll get them in the mail within 3 business days. Each one carries a fine, starting at $250 for minor violations, going up to $1,000 for the major ones like the unpermitted deck and the oversized shed. He did some quick math in his head. She's looking at about $5,000 in fines, give or take. And she has to fix everything? Yep. She'll get correction orders with deadlines. If she doesn't comply, the fines increase, and we can potentially put a lien on the property. Marcus gathered up his photos. Between you and me, this is why I don't like busybody HOA presidents. They spend so much time looking for problems in everyone else's yard that they don't notice the beam in their own eye, if you know what I mean. Biblical reference noted. He stood up and handed me an official document. This is your clearance certificate for the shed. Keep it with your property records. If Mrs. Thornhill or anyone else gives you grief about it, this shows you were inspected and approved. After Marcus left, I sat at my table for a long time, just staring at the clearance certificate. Part of me felt vindicated. Brenda had been making life difficult for half the neighborhood with her petty complaints and power trips, but another part of me wondered what kind of retaliation she might attempt once she got those violation notices. I didn't have to wait long to find out. Wednesday evening, I came home from a rare day at the office to find a letter taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, signed by Brenda in her capacity as president. The letter informed me that my shed, while apparently meeting county code, was still under review by the Architectural Committee for Aesthetic Compliance. There would be a special hearing the following Tuesday evening, and my presence was mandatory. I called Tom immediately. "Did you get anything from the HOA today?" "No, why?" I read him the letter. "She's trying an end run around the county approval." "Can she do that?" "I don't know. Maybe." "The HOA has its own rules on top of county code." I rubbed my forehead, feeling a headache coming on. "I need to look at the bylaws again." That night I spent 3 hours going through every page of the HOA governing documents. The Architectural Committee did have the authority to review structures for aesthetic compliance, but there were specific procedures they had to follow. They needed to provide at least 2 weeks' notice for a hearing, not 5 days. They needed to specify exactly what aesthetic standards were allegedly being violated. And they needed a quorum of committee members, not just the president. Brenda had violated at least 3 procedural requirements with her letter. I drafted a response citing the specific bylaw sections she'd ignored and emailed it to her, copying the other 2 board members. Then, I sent a separate email to the full board requesting Brenda's recusal from any matters involving my property, given her obvious bias and the fact that she was currently facing code violations of her own. The next morning, I got a call from Dan Mitchell, the HOA vice president. Dan was a retired accountant, reasonable guy, someone who actually read the documents before making decisions. "Sam, I got your email," he said. "I think you're right about the procedural issues. Brenda shouldn't have sent that letter without running it by me and Susan first." Susan Chen was the HOA secretary, a lawyer who worked in family law. What does Susan think? Haven't talked to her yet, but I will. Look, between you and me, Brenda's been going off the rails a bit lately. We've had 3 homeowners threaten to sue over violations she claimed they had, but that weren't actually in the bylaws. Why hasn't the board reined her in? Dan sighed. It's complicated. She's very forceful. And technically, as president, she has a lot of unilateral authority in day-to-day operations. But something like an architectural hearing, that's supposed to be a committee decision. So what happens with Tuesday? I'm going to recommend we cancel it. Your shed is clearly compliant. I drove by yesterday and honestly couldn't see what her problem is. It looks fine. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate you being reasonable about this. That's my job. Well, my volunteer job. He chuckled. Though after this term is up, I think I'm done. This HOA stuff is more drama than it's worth. The hearing was officially canceled by email that afternoon. Brenda sent a terse message to the board saying she was disappointed in their lack of support for maintaining community standards. She didn't copy me on it, but Dan forwarded it with a note saying, "See what I mean?" Friday afternoon, I was working at my desk when I heard raised voices outside. I looked out to see Brenda standing in her driveway, waving papers at a county official in a pickup truck. Even from 2 houses away, I could hear her shouting about harassment and selective enforcement. Tom texted me, "She got the violations. This is better than cable." I probably should have felt bad for her. $5,000 in fines and a long list of corrections. is no joke. But I couldn't muster much sympathy for someone who'd tried to weaponize the system against me and apparently half the neighborhood. The weekend passed quietly. I mowed my lawn, did some work in my completely legal and properly permitted shed, and avoided any interaction with Brenda. Monday morning, though, things escalated. I was making coffee when I saw a sheriff's car pull up to Brenda's house. 2 deputies got out and went to her door. They talked to her for about 10 minutes, then left. She immediately got in her car and drove off, tires squealing slightly as she pulled away. My phone rang. It was Susan Chen, the HOA secretary. "Sam, have you checked your email this morning?" "Not yet. Was just about to." "Why?" "Brenda sent an email to the entire neighborhood at 2 in the morning. It's not good." I opened my laptop and pulled up my email. There it was, sent at 2:47 a.m. subject line: "Corruption in Willowbrook Heights." The email was unhinged. Brenda accused me of bribing the county inspector, claimed I was having an affair with Susan Chen to manipulate board votes, alleged that Dan Mitchell was embezzling HOA funds, and suggested that there was a vast conspiracy to persecute her. It was rambling, full of spelling errors, and clearly written by someone who hadn't slept. "Oh, wow," I said. "Yeah. Dan and I are calling an emergency board meeting tonight to discuss removing her as president. This is beyond inappropriate. She accused me of bribing a county official. That's basically slander." "I know. I'm sorry, Sam. We should have acted sooner when she started going overboard." Susan sounded genuinely distressed. "I'm a lawyer. I should have seen the liability issues." But she was just so insistent that she was protecting property values and maintaining standards. We thought she was overzealous, not unstable. The emergency board meeting that evening was held at the community clubhouse. About 40 homeowners showed up, which was roughly a third of the neighborhood. Normally, HOA meetings got maybe 10 people. Brenda arrived last, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled, and she had a manic energy that put everyone on edge. Dan called the meeting to order and immediately moved to address the email. "Brenda, your message this morning was completely out of line. You made serious accusations against multiple people without any evidence." "I have evidence." Brenda pulled out a folder stuffed with papers. "I've been documenting everything. Sam Peterson's shed violates aesthetic standards. Susan has been making decisions without board approval. You've been approving expenses that aren't in the budget." "Brenda," Susan said calmly, "we've reviewed all of this. Sam's shed is compliant. I haven't made any decisions without proper procedure, and Dan's expense approvals are all within his authority as treasurer." "You're all in on it." Brenda's voice was rising. "You're trying to push me out because I actually care about this community, because I enforce the rules that everyone else wants to ignore." Tom stood up from the audience. "You sent me a violation notice because my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. There's no such rule." Another homeowner, Mary Rodriguez, stood. "You told me I couldn't plant roses in my front yard because they weren't on the approved plant list. I checked the bylaws. There is no approved plant list." More people started chiming in with their own stories of Brenda's overreach. The meeting devolved into chaos, with Brenda shouting over people, insisting she was right, that they were all against her. Finally, Dan had to bang a gavel to restore order. "That's enough. I'm calling for a vote. All in favor of removing Brenda Thornhill as president and from the board effective immediately, say aye." The vote was unanimous among the board members, minus Brenda. Even she seemed shocked by how decisively she'd lost support. "You can't do this," she said, her voice suddenly small. "I've worked so hard for this community." "You've bullied people and abused your position," Susan said, not unkindly but firmly. "It's time for you to step back." Brenda gathered her papers with shaking hands and walked out. The room was silent for a moment after she left. Dan cleared his throat. "Right. So we need to elect an interim president. I nominate Susan." Susan was voted in quickly. She addressed the crowd with a tired smile. "First order of business, we're going to review all violation notices sent out in the last 6 months and rescind any that aren't actually based on our governing documents. Second, we're implementing a new policy requiring board consensus before any official HOA correspondence is sent to homeowners. No more unilateral actions." There was a small round of applause. The meeting wrapped up shortly after, and I walked out with Tom and Jennifer. "That was intense," Jennifer said. I actually feel bad for her. She seemed genuinely confused about why everyone was upset. She needs help, Tom agreed. Like, professional help. That email was not written by someone in a good mental state. I couldn't disagree. Whatever satisfaction I'd felt about the inspector finding her violations had evaporated. Brenda clearly had something going on beyond just being a power-hungry HOA president. The next week was quiet. Brenda didn't respond to the board's removal notice. Her house sat dark most evenings, and her car was rarely in the driveway. I wondered if she'd gone to stay with family somewhere. Then, 2 weeks after her removal, I came home to find a for sale sign in her yard. Tom called immediately. Did you see? Just pulled up. Wow. Can't say I'm surprised. How do you stay in a neighborhood after all that? He had a point. Brenda had burned every bridge, alienated every neighbor. Even if people felt sorry for her, the damage was done. The house sold quickly, within a month. I never saw Brenda again. A young couple with a baby moved in, nice people who immediately endeared themselves to the neighborhood by not caring what shade of black anyone's mailbox was. Susan turned out to be an excellent HOA president. She implemented common-sense policies, stopped the aggressive violation enforcement, and actually managed to bring the community together for social events. We had a neighborhood cookout in June where more people showed up than had in the previous 5 years combined. I was manning the grill with Tom when Dan walked over with a beer. You know, I was thinking about the whole Brenda situation, Dan said. I feel like we failed her in a way. How so? I flipped a burger. We saw the signs that she was going overboard. The excessive complaints, the power trips. But we didn't intervene until it got really bad. Maybe if we'd addressed it sooner, helped her understand she was crossing lines, it wouldn't have ended like it did. Maybe, I said, but at some point adults are responsible for their own behavior. She chose to file a false complaint about my shed. She chose to send that unhinged email. Nobody made her do those things. Tom nodded. True. And she could have apologized at any point, could have backed down, admitted she made mistakes. Instead, she doubled down every time. We stood there in silence for a moment, watching the neighborhood kids run around playing tag, neighbors chatting and laughing. This was what an HOA was supposed to facilitate, not prevent. Still, Dan said, I hope she's okay, wherever she ended up. Yeah, I agreed. Me too. A few months later, I was cleaning out my garage when I found the manila envelope Marcus had left with me, the one with photos of all Brenda's violations. I'd never thrown it away, just tossed it on a shelf and forgotten about it. I looked through the pictures again, seeing them with different eyes now. The oversized shed, the unpermitted deck, the fence that was 6 inches too tall. None of it was malicious. Brenda had just done what homeowners do, made improvements to her property that seemed reasonable at the time. She probably had no idea most of them were violations. The irony was thick. She'd spent so much time hunting for violations in other people's properties that she'd never stopped to consider her own might not be perfect. I thought about keeping the envelope as some kind of trophy, evidence of my vindication. But that felt petty and small. So I shredded everything, photos and all. The whole situation was over. No point dwelling on it. That weekend, I added a small window box to my shed and planted some flowers. They weren't on any approved plant list, because as Mary Rodriguez had discovered, no such list existed. They were just flowers I liked, bright yellow marigolds that reminded me of my grandmother's garden. Tom came over while I was watering them. Looks good. You worried about the HOA giving you grief? Not even a little bit, he laughed. New sheriff in town, huh? Something like that. We sat on my back porch, drinking beer and watching the sunset behind my perfectly compliant, inspector-approved shed. The whole ordeal had been stressful and ridiculous, but it had also brought the neighborhood together in an unexpected way. We'd all been dealing with Brenda's overreach individually, thinking we were alone in it. The emergency meeting had shown us we were all in the same boat. You ever wonder what she's doing now? Tom asked. Sometimes. Dan heard from someone that she moved to a condo in Durham. No HOA to deal with, which is probably for the best. Think she learned anything from all this? I considered that. I don't know. I'd like to think so, but people don't usually change unless they want to. And Brenda seemed pretty convinced she was in the right up until the very end. True. Tom finished his beer. Well, either way, I'm glad she's gone. Susan's doing a way better job. After Tom left, I stayed outside for a while longer, enjoying the peace. My phone buzzed with an email from Susan about an upcoming neighborhood yard sale. The message was friendly, informative, and completely reasonable. What a concept. I thought about how differently things might have gone. If Marcus hadn't been thorough in his inspection, if he hadn't decided to survey the neighborhood, if Brenda had been just a little more self-aware. But that was the thing about petty tyrants. They never thought the rules applied to them. The next HOA meeting was actually pleasant. We discussed regular business like landscaping maintenance and pool repairs. Nobody got accused of corruption. Nobody sent unhinged emails at 2 in the morning. It was almost boring, which was exactly how HOA meetings should be. During the open forum at the end, a newer homeowner named Lisa Peterson raised her hand. I just wanted to say, I bought my house right before all that drama went down. I actually almost backed out of the purchase when I heard the HOA was having issues. But you all handled it so professionally, and now I'm really happy to be part of this community. There were murmurs of agreement around the room. Susan smiled. Thank you, Lisa. That means a lot. We learned some hard lessons about the importance of checks and balances, even in a small community organization like this. Dan added, and we've updated our bylaws to prevent any one person from having too much unilateral authority. Everything significant now requires at least 2 board members to sign off. After the meeting, I walked back to my house with a sense of contentment I hadn't felt in months. The whole situation with Brenda had been a reminder that power, even small-scale power like an HOA presidency, could corrupt. But it had also shown that communities could self-correct when people were willing to speak up and hold their leaders accountable. My shed stood in the backyard, housing my lawnmower, tools, and gardening supplies. Just a simple structure doing its job, nothing more. But it had become a symbol of something larger, a reminder that when someone tries to weaponize bureaucracy for petty reasons, sometimes the bureaucracy fights back. I never did find out what happened to all those fines Brenda received. I assumed she paid them, or maybe contested some of them, or perhaps worked out a payment plan. It wasn't my business, really. Marcus had done his job, issued the citations he was required to issue, and that was that. What I did know was that the new couple who bought her house, Jason and Emma Reynolds, had hired contractors to address several issues with the property before they moved in. I'd seen them getting permits for deck work and fence modifications. They were doing it right, the way it was supposed to be done. One Saturday in October, I was outside raking leaves when Jason came over with a 6-pack of beer. Hey neighbor, got a minute? Sure, what's up? He set the beer down on my porch step. I wanted to thank you, actually. We heard about what went down with the previous owner. The realtor told us some of it, and the neighbors filled in the rest. Sounds like it was pretty crazy. That's one word for it. Well, when we were doing our inspection, we found a bunch of stuff that wasn't up to code. The inspector said if it hadn't been documented already by the county, we might not have known to fix it before moving in. So, indirectly, your shed situation helped us out. I laughed. Glad something good came from it. The neighborhood seems great now, though. Everyone's been really welcoming. He glanced at my shed. That's a nice structure, by the way. Did you build it yourself? Yeah, a couple weekends of work. Think you could give me some pointers? I want to build something similar, but I'm not very handy. I'm happy to help. Let me grab a couple of those beers and we can talk through it. We spent the next hour discussing shed construction, permit requirements, and HOA guidelines. It was a weirdly full-circle moment, helping someone else do what had started the whole mess with Brenda. But this time, there was no drama, no accusations, just one neighbor helping another with a home improvement project. As fall turned to winter, life in Willowbrook Heights settled into a comfortable rhythm. The HOA handled its business quietly and competently. Property values stayed stable. People decorated for Halloween and Christmas without worrying about violation notices for having the wrong shade of orange pumpkin or too many inflatable snowmen. I added some shelving to my shed in November, maximizing the storage space. Every time I went in there to grab a tool or put something away, I thought about that morning when Brenda had stood at the end of my driveway taking pictures, so sure she'd found something to nail me with. The universe had a funny sense of humor sometimes. In December, the HOA held a holiday party at the clubhouse. It was well-attended, festive, and drama-free. Susan gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition period and expressing optimism for the coming year. "We've been through some challenges," she said, raising a glass of champagne, "but we came out stronger and more united as a community. Here's to new beginnings and good neighbors." Everyone cheered and clinked glasses. I stood next to Tom and Jennifer, watching as people mingled and laughed. It was hard to believe that just 8 months ago, this same clubhouse had been the site of that chaotic emergency meeting. "You ever miss the drama?" Tom asked with a grin. "Not even a little bit." "Yeah, me neither, but it makes for a hell of a story." He wasn't wrong. I'd already told the tale to friends and family outside the neighborhood, and they were always amazed by the absurdity of it all. The HOA president who called the inspector on my shed, only to get caught with 11 violations herself. It sounded like something from a sitcom, except it had really happened. As winter deepened and a new year arrived, I found myself reflecting on the whole experience more philosophically. Brenda had been a cautionary tale about what happens when someone gets a little bit of authority and lets it go to their head. But she was also a human being who'd clearly been struggling with something, whether it was stress or mental health issues, or just a fundamental misunderstanding of what leadership meant. I hoped she was doing better wherever she was. I hoped she'd found some peace and perspective. And I hoped she'd learned that you can't go through life looking for problems in everyone else's backyard, while ignoring the mess in your own. In January, I got a notice from the county that all of Brenda's violations had been resolved. The new owners had fixed everything as part of their move and renovations. The case was closed, fines paid, no further action needed. I filed the notice away with my shed's clearance certificate, 2 pieces of paper that told the story of a strange few months in my otherwise quiet life. Spring came around again, my 4th in Willowbrook Heights. The neighborhood looked beautiful, flowers blooming, lawns greening up, kids riding bikes in the street. Jason and Emma's baby took her first steps in their backyard, and half the neighbors came over to watch and celebrate. It was the kind of community moment that made you remember why people chose to live in neighborhoods with HOAs in the first place, the sense of shared space and shared experience. In April, almost exactly a year after Brenda had stood at the end of my driveway taking pictures, I painted my shed again. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I changed it from gray to a nice dark blue that complemented my house's updated trim color. I didn't ask permission from the architectural committee. I didn't need to, because the bylaws were clear that repainting an existing structure in HOA-approved colors didn't require approval. But I did send Susan a courtesy email with a photo just to keep everyone in the loop. She responded within an hour. "Looks great. Love the color choice." That was it. No drama, no inspection, no accusations, just a normal interaction between a homeowner and an HOA board member. Tom came over that evening to admire the paint job. "Blue's a good choice. Makes it pop." "Thanks. Figured it was time for a change." We stood there looking at the shed, this simple structure that had inadvertently caused such chaos. It was funny how something so mundane could become the catalyst for exposing deeper problems in a community. If Brenda hadn't fixated on my shed, would her other issues have come to light? Would the neighborhood have continued suffering under her petty tyranny? "You know what the best part is?" Tom said. "She really thought she had you. She was so sure you'd screwed up and she was going to make you pay for it. Pride before the fall." "Exactly." He shook his head, chuckling. 11 violations. I still can't believe it. What are the odds? Pretty good, apparently, if you're so busy looking at everyone else's property that you ignore your own. We went inside for dinner, but I came back out later that night to sit on the porch and enjoy the cool evening air. The shed looked good in the moonlight, its fresh paint gleaming slightly. It was solidly built, properly permitted, and aesthetically pleasing. Everything a shed should be. I thought about Marcus, the inspector who'd been thorough enough to not just check my shed, but to survey the whole neighborhood. He'd probably dealt with hundreds of petty HOA disputes over his career. I wondered if he'd ever had one turn out quite like this, where the complainant ended up worse off than the person they'd complained about. The next week, I ran into Dan at the grocery store. We chatted about the usual stuff, weather and work and neighborhood gossip. Then he mentioned something interesting. You know, we've had 3 people ask about running for the board when elections come up in the fall. That's the most interest we've had in years. That's good, right? Very good. People are engaged now, paying attention. The whole thing with Brenda, as terrible as it was at the time, it woke people up to the importance of HOA governance. He grabbed a cart and started walking toward the produce section. Silver lining, I guess. I thought about that as I finished my shopping. Communities needed people willing to serve, to put in the often thankless work of maintaining common spaces and enforcing reasonable rules. But they also needed accountability, checks and balances to prevent any one person from going off the rails. Willowbrook Heights had learned that lesson the hard way, but it had learned it. In June, I hosted a barbecue at my house. About 20 neighbors showed up, including Jason and Emma with their baby. We ate burgers and hot dogs, the kids played in my backyard, and at one point Tom gave an impromptu tour of my shed to a few of the newer residents who hadn't heard the full story. "This is the shed that started it all," he announced dramatically, "the shed that launched 1,000 violations." Everyone laughed. The story had become part of neighborhood lore, something people told newcomers as an example of how not to run an HOA. Emma came over to me while Tom was embellishing the tale. "I hope it's okay, but we looked up the old HOA meeting minutes online. The stuff that was documented is pretty wild." It was a weird time, I admitted, but it worked out in the end. "Did you ever hear what happened to her? The old president?" "Not really. Someone said she moved to Durham, but I don't know for sure. I hope she's doing okay." Emma looked thoughtful. "It must have been hard for her being removed like that in front of everyone. I mean, she brought it on herself, but still. Yeah, it wasn't pleasant to watch, but she'd burned a lot of bridges by that point. People were fed up." The party continued into the evening, and I found myself feeling grateful for how things had turned out. Not grateful for the stress and drama, but grateful for the community that had emerged from it. We'd been tested and had come through stronger. As summer progressed, the neighborhood thrived. The pool was well maintained and heavily used. The common areas looked beautiful. Susan organized a community yard sale that raised money for local schools. Everything an HOA should do, done without power trips or petty enforcement. In late August, I was working in my shed when my phone rang. Unknown number with a local area code. "Hello?" "Hi, is this Samuel Peterson?" A woman's voice, professional but friendly. "Yes, this is Sam. My name is Andrea Fisher. I'm a reporter with the Raleigh Tribune. I'm working on a story about HOA conflicts and how communities resolve them. Your name came up in some public records I was reviewing. Would you be willing to talk to me about what happened in your neighborhood last year?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to just put the whole thing behind me and move on. But another part thought that maybe there was value in telling the story and helping other communities learn from our experience. "What exactly would the article cover?" I asked. "I'm looking at how HOA boards can go from being helpful organizations to creating real problems for residents and what legal remedies exist. Your situation is interesting because it resolved without litigation, which is rare. Most of these cases end up in court." "Can I think about it?" "Of course. I'll email you some information about the article and we can set up a time to talk if you decide you're interested." She sent the email that afternoon. The article was part of a series on property rights and HOA governance. She'd already interviewed lawyers, legislators, and several homeowners from different communities. My story would be one example among many. I called Tom to get his opinion. "What do you think? Worth doing?" "I mean, it's a good story, and maybe it helps someone else dealing with a crazy HOA president, but it'll put our neighborhood back in the spotlight, which some people might not love." He had a point. I sent an email to Susan, explaining the situation and asking her thoughts as HOA president. She responded quickly. "I think it could be valuable for other communities to learn from our experience. If you're comfortable doing the interview, you have my support. Just maybe emphasize how we fixed the problems and moved forward." I called Andrea Fisher back the next day and agreed to an interview. We met at a coffee shop near my office, and I spent an hour walking her through the timeline of events. She asked good questions, took detailed notes, and didn't try to sensationalize anything. "What do you think was the key to resolving this without lawyers and lawsuits?" she asked toward the end. "Honestly, Having board members who were willing to admit there was a problem and fix it. Dan and Susan could have circled the wagons and defended Brenda, but they recognized she'd crossed lines. They put the community ahead of internal politics. And what about Mrs. Thornhill? Any sense of why she acted the way she did? I thought about that. I think she genuinely believed she was protecting the neighborhood. She'd convinced herself that enforcing every little rule, even ones that didn't exist, was the right thing to do. She couldn't see that she was creating more problems than she was solving. Do you feel vindicated now that time has passed? Not really. I feel relieved that it's over, and I'm happy with how the community came together. But vindication suggests I was trying to prove something. I just wanted to store my lawnmower in a shed. Andrea smiled. That's a good quote. Can I use it? Sure. The article came out in September, part of a Sunday feature section. It was well written and balanced, presenting my story as one example of HOA governance gone wrong but ultimately corrected. They'd interviewed Susan and Dan as well, and both came across as thoughtful leaders who'd learned from a difficult situation. There was no mention of Brenda's current whereabouts, just a note that she'd declined to comment for the article. I hoped that meant she was moving on with her life, not dwelling on the past. The article generated some discussion on local news sites and social media. Most people were sympathetic to the situation, sharing their own HOA horror stories. A few commented that I should have sued Brenda for harassment, but that had never been my goal. I just wanted to live peacefully in my house with my completely legal shed. October brought HOA elections. Susan ran for another term as president and won easily. 2 new board members were elected, both reasonable people who'd been active in the community. The era of Brenda's leadership felt like ancient history now, something that had happened to a different neighborhood. I voted at the community center, dropping my ballot in the box along with 30 other homeowners. 30 people voting in an HOA election was apparently unprecedented in Willowbrook Heights. Usually, they got maybe 8 or 10 votes. People are paying attention now, Dan said as we watched the ballot counting. That's Brenda's real legacy, I guess. She pissed people off enough that they started caring about HOA governance. It was a strange legacy, but not entirely without value. As another year drew to a close, I found myself in a place of genuine contentment. My house was paid down, my work was going well, and my neighborhood was thriving under competent leadership. The shed in my backyard continued to do its job, housing tools and equipment without causing any international incidents. In December, I got a holiday card from Marcus, the county inspector. Inside was a handwritten note. Hope all is well in Willowbrook Heights. That shed still holding up? Best, Marcus. I wrote back, thanking him for his thorough inspection and updating him on how the neighborhood had improved. You probably deal with situations like this all the time, I wrote, but I want you to know that your professionalism made a real difference for our community. Thanks for doing your job the right way. I meant it. Marcus could have just checked my shed, filed his report, and moved on. Instead, he'd taken the time to do a proper survey of the area, treating all properties equally. That even-handedness had been the catalyst for everything that followed. The holiday party that year was even better than the previous one. More people, more food, more laughter. Susan gave another speech, this one reflecting on 2 years of steady leadership and looking ahead to the future. We've become a real community, she said. Not just people who happen to live on the same streets, but neighbors who care about each other and work together to make this a great place to live. That's what an HOA should facilitate, and I'm proud of what we've built together. There was genuine warmth in the applause that followed. These weren't people clapping politely out of obligation. They were celebrating something real, a community that had been tested and had emerged stronger. As the party wound down and people started heading home, Tom and I stood outside in the cold December air, looking up at the stars. Hell of a journey from Brenda taking pictures of your shed to this, he said. Yeah, funny how things work out. You ever regret building that shed? Like, if you'd known all the drama it would cause, would you have done it differently? I thought about that. No, I didn't do anything wrong. The shed was legal, properly built, completely by the book. If I'd backed down or not built it because I was worried about Brenda's reaction, that would have set a bad precedent. Sometimes you have to stand your ground, even over something as small as a shed. Plus, it's a really nice shed. I laughed. "It is a really nice shed." We said goodnight, and I walked back to my house, looking at the dark blue structure in my backyard. It was just a shed, 8 by 10 feet, holding lawn equipment and tools. But it had become something more, a symbol of standing up to petty tyranny, of the importance of good governance, of communities coming together when it matters. In the grand scheme of things, the whole situation had been ridiculous. An HOA president calling a county inspector over a completely legal shed, only to get caught with 11 violations of her own. It was almost too perfectly ironic to be real. But it had been real, and it had taught me something important. The rules have to apply equally to everyone, especially to the people making and enforcing them. The moment someone decides the rules are for everyone else but not for them, they've lost the moral authority to lead. Brenda had learned that lesson the hard way. I hoped she'd taken it to heart wherever she was now. As for me, I had a good life in a good neighborhood with good neighbors. My shed was properly permitted, aesthetically pleasing, and fully functional. And if anyone ever had a problem with it, I had a clearance certificate from the county inspector tucked away in my files, ready to produce at a moment's notice. But I didn't think I'd need it. Those days were behind us now. Willowbrook Heights had moved forward, grown up, learned what really mattered. We weren't perfect, but we were trying to be better, to build something worth preserving. And that was enough. More than enough, really. It was everything a community should be. I went inside, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and sat by the window looking out at my backyard. The shed stood solid and square in the moonlight, a testament to careful planning and honest work. Everything a shed should be, everything a home improvement project should be. Just doing its job, without drama or fanfare, exactly as it should be. The next morning, I woke up to fresh snow covering the neighborhood. Everything looked clean and new, the past buried under a white blanket. Kids were already out building snowmen, their laughter carrying through the cold air. I made coffee and went out to my shed to grab a shovel. The door opened smoothly, no ice or sticking. Inside, everything was organized and dry, protected from the elements. I grabbed what I needed and spent the next hour clearing my driveway and sidewalk. Jason came out to do the same, and we ended up clearing Emma's car and the path to their front door as well. Then Tom came out, and before long several neighbors were helping each other dig out from the unexpected snowfall. No one had called a meeting or organized anything. We just did what neighbors do. That was the real story, I thought as I shoveled. Not the drama with Brenda, not the inspector finding violations, not even the emergency board meeting. The real story was what came after, how a community came together and decided to be better. My shed had been the catalyst, but it was just the beginning. The real work had been everything that followed, the difficult conversations, the governance reforms, the conscious decision to treat each other with respect and fairness. As I finished shoveling and headed back inside, I took one more look at the shed. It was covered in snow now, barely visible except for its dark blue walls peeking through the white. Still there, still solid, still doing its job, just like the community around it. And that was the perfect ending to the whole strange saga. Not revenge, not vindication, just a quiet return to normal life in a neighborhood that had learned some hard lessons and come out better for it. I went inside, hung up my coat, and got back to work. The shed would be there when I needed it, reliable and uncomplicated. And the neighborhood would keep moving forward, one day at a time, building something worth preserving. Sometimes the best victories are the quiet ones, the ones where life just goes back to normal, and you remember why you chose to be part of a community in the first place, where people look out for each other, respect each other's property, and don't try to weaponize bureaucracy for petty revenge. Willowbrook Heights had become that kind of place, and my shed, the infamous 8 by 10 foot structure that had started it all, stood as a quiet monument to the power of standing your ground when you're in the right. Not bad for a weekend project that I'd built to store my lawnmower. Not bad at all.